Hello and welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. I'm Renee Williams and I'm an information specialist with the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, and I'm here with my co-host Billy Thomas.
Hey Renee, I'm Billy Thomas, as you mentioned. I'm an extension forester here in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, and I've really had a great time with this show, working with you on it. We've been at it for a little over a month now amongst this COVID pandemic, and we're really trying to engage our clients across Kentucky, those with an interest in forestry and wildlife topics, or really all natural resources. So we're really appreciative to have all of our folks with us. We've got a great lineup. We've got 4 segments on today's show. The first one, we're going to be talking about grafting trees. Now, some of you all may have grafted fruit trees in the past, but we actually going to have Dr. Laura DeWald on talking about grafting oak trees. And she's also got another project that she's going to talk about a little bit as well. And then we're going to have Dr. Ellen Crocker talking about frost damage. This past week, we had some really low temperatures in some places in Kentucky that did cause some damage. So Ellen's going to be talking about some of that and what we can expect to happen as a result of that frost damage. And then following that, we're going to have Dr. Matt Springer. Matt is going to be talking about birding in the bluegrass. You know, it's a great time. A lot of us are at home now. We can see the birds in our backyard and out in our woods. So Matt's going to be talking a little bit about birding here in the bluegrass. And then we're going to wrap the show up with the Tree of the Week. This weekly segment highlights one of the important trees that we have here in Kentucky, and we do have a lot of them, well over 100 different native trees, but this one's especially important because it's the state tree of Kentucky, the yellow poplar. So we'll have Laurie talking about that one at the end of the show. So again, thank you all so much for being with us. And Renee, without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring up Dr. Laura DeWald's video, and we're going to learn about grafting.
DeWald, and I am a tree improvement specialist in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky, and I'm working on a tree improvement program for white oak. Today, I'm going to graft a white oak onto a bur oak, and you might be wondering, why the heck would I do that? And that's actually a great question. First, let's talk about why we graft in trees. We graft because we want to create genetically identical copies or clones of a tree that has particular characteristics that we want to reproduce exactly. Now, mostly with trees, grafting is done with landscape or ornamental trees or with fruit and nut trees. For example, if you want a Honeycrisp apple to always taste like a Honeycrisp, the best way to achieve that is to graft the tree that created that original apple variety. Now, in forestry, we graft primarily in a tree improvement program. And again, we're doing that because we found trees in the forest that we want to reproduce identically. So they might have some really good traits, and we want to be able to reproduce those. So we're going to graft and create clones, and we're going to put them into a grafted seed orchard. And a grafted seed orchard will contain many clones of many different high-quality parents. And the pollen mixing among those high-quality parents will result in genetically diverse acorns, and those will produce genetically improved high-quality white oak seedlings, which can then be planted back into the forest. Now, a grafted seed orchard with white oak can start to produce acorns in about 7 years. And this is in contrast to a white oak in the forest, where it'll take at least 20 or more years before that white oak tree could produce acorns. Now, you might be wondering why I'm grafting, again, a white oak onto a bur oak, because in most cases, what we're grafting and what we're grafting onto are the same species. But with white oak, we can actually get successful grafts by grafting onto bur oak and also onto swamp white oak. And we do that because bur oak and swamp white oak have root systems that are tolerant to a wide range of soil conditions, and white oak is much more picky. And by having our white oak grafted onto bur oak or swamp white oak, it'll give us a lot more flexibility about where we can create or get our seed orchard located. So now I'm going to step you through an actual graft. There are many different kinds of grafts that can be done. With oaks, we primarily use a graft called a whip and tongue graft, and that's what I'm going to show you today. So I've got my bur oak, and this was dormant, but I brought it into the greenhouse and I waited for it to start to flush. and which started a couple days ago. And this is the perfect time to graft, because at this point, the sugars in the root systems have been pulled up into the stem, because that was what was supporting the flushing. And we need all those sugars up here, which is going to support the graft once I get the graft on. So we're going to decapitate this poor little guy. Sorry, guy, because we don't need that part. And I'm going to graft a dormant white oak scion, that's what we call the top part, onto this bur oak rootstock. Now, if you can see there's this bump here, this is what grew last year, and we only use last year's growth when we're grafting. And it has really nice lateral buds on it, and so we want to find twigs from a tree in the forest. So this actually came from Boone County, which is near Columbia, Missouri. And this was a really nice looking tree. And so the scion was collected in the wintertime, so January, February, when it was dormant, and then we put it in the refrigerator to keep it dormant. So we're going to graft a dormant scion onto a bur oak rootstock that was just starting to grow. So I'm going to trim up my rootstock a little bit here. Now, I'm going to assume the grafting position. It looks like a chicken, but we actually put our hands up here, our arms really tight, because our grafting knife is very sharp. And we want to create a nice cut, angled cut. This is the whip part of the graft. Ah, perfect. Okay. Now, once I've created the whip part of the graft, I'm actually going to take my knife and I'm going to cut a little slit into it this way. And this is called the tongue part of the graft. Okay, so I cut a little slit going down, about a third of the way down in my cut there. Now, here's the tricky part, is I have to create this exact same size graft, or cut, on my rootstock. So, create the whip part first. That's pretty good. And then I'm going to create my tongue. Ha, good. Now, I'm simply going to insert the two pieces together. And there you have it. Now, a really important part is we have to make sure that the bark on my rootstock lines up perfectly, at least on one side, with the bark of my scion material. And that's because right underneath the bark is a tissue called the vascular cambium. And we need to have the vascular cambium of the scion match exactly with the vascular cambium of the rootstock, because that's the tissue that will grow the cells that will bring those two parts. They'll bring these two parts together. They'll actually grow together and they'll form new tissues. So I've got it lined up really well here. And I'm going to take a grafting band, it's basically a rubber band, and I'm going to wrap this around, and I'm going to do this so tight. I'm going to pull this as tight as I can. And I'm going to move up this graft. So I'm pulling this almost to the point where this band will break, and sometimes it does, and you have to start over. But I really need the vascular cambium to be touching each other and to be touching tightly between my scion and my rootstock. So I've gotten all the way up. And then this is the hard part for me, is tying it off. I always seem to get rubber bands flying everywhere. And now I'm going to simply just cut this piece off. And there we have it. Now, we don't want, this has too many lateral buds on it, and we don't want this terminal bud actually on here, because what will happen is when these start to flush, they'll actually pull water and sugars up too fast. And what will happen is it will cause that movement of water at that rate will cause our graft to separate back apart. So I'm going to clip it so that we just have our two lateral buds, and that's perfect. Now, the last step is we have to make sure that this doesn't dry out, because if the scion dries out, it will die. So I have this funky, waxy, stretchy, soft tape. It's called grafting or budding tape. And we're just going to stretch and wrap this around. We start with where the rubber band started, our grafting band started, and we're going to go all the way up the twig. It's okay if you need more than one piece. They come in these little perforated pieces, which is just perfect. So we're going to go all the way to the top. And I can wrap this right across those lateral buds, because in the sun, this tape becomes very soft. It will still keep the moisture in, but it becomes very soft, and the buds will actually be able to flush right through it. It'll poke a little hole, and it'll flush right through it. So there you have it. We have a white oak grafted onto a bur oak. I'll label this in a moment, but so we have a white oak from Boone County, Missouri, grafted onto our bur oak. And now this is ready to go into a clone bank, which we will use to create a grafted seed orchard for the White Oak Tree Improvement Program. So I hope you have enjoyed this demonstration. If you want more information, the Extension Program in the Horticulture Department at the University of Kentucky has a lot of resources about grafting. And you can also go to YouTube and look at grafting demos there. And if you want more information about the White Oak Tree Improvement Program, please visit our website at whiteoakgenetics.org. And you can also follow the progress of the White Oak Tree Improvement Program on our new on our new Facebook site. So that's what I have today.
You know, a lot of folks may not realize that they can do that with oak trees.
Right, definitely. So that was Dr. Laura DeWalt, and she is on. And again, if anybody has any questions about her video, please type them in the chat pod. But one thing I wanted to talk to Dr. DeWalt about is there's several ways that people can get involved in your projects. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, and it's actually my favorite part of the whole project is having a variety of folks help out. This is a huge effort because we actually are trying to collect genetic material from basically the entire eastern United States, because we want all of the genetic material of white oak represented in our tree improvement program. So we will be collecting acorns, and that's a great way for folks to help us out, because obviously I can't run around all over the eastern US and collect acorns. So I'll be starting that effort, organizing that effort in August. So if folks are interested, that's a great way for them to participate, and they can just email me. And I will contact you with instructions, and it's not hard. And it's a lot of fun.
If you don't mind, could you give your email address?
Oh, sure. So it's basically my first name dot last name at uky.edu. So laura.dewald@uky.edu.
That's great. Well, I don't see any questions so far, so you must have covered everything they needed to hear. So do you have anything else you want to? Oh, you do have some. Look at the tree.
So this is one of the grafts that I grafted. See if I can get it close enough for you to see. And the bud has flushed. See how it poked up through the grafting tape? And so this is actually flushed. So this is a successful graft. And it's well on its way to producing, it'll start flushing and produce leaves. The other thing I wanted to mention is back here on the rootstock, you can see there's actually some buds. And you actually, if you do graft, you want to pick those off, because we don't want those flushing, because it will take resources away from the white oak graft. So if you try this, and it's easy to do, just give it a try, you do want to sort of pick those off if you start to see the bur oaks start to grow.
There is a question. It says that she's paranoid about touching the ends with her fingers. Is there something they need to worry about or not?
You know, the purist grafters will say, you know, never touch the cut ends because you're introducing bacteria, blah, blah, blah. I'm kind of a sloppy grafter, so, and I'm not that coordinated, so I don't personally worry about it that much. I think if the graft is going to take, it'll take, and you know, obviously you want to avoid touching it if you can, but if you do touch it, don't be, you know, don't throw that effort away. I would still go ahead and graft it. Yeah, that's a great question.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for being on our show. We greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Laura.
So it looks like now we have some frost damage topics to talk about. And last week, that was a good week for that to happen. And so now we're kind of letting people know about some things that might happen after the fact.
Yeah, we had some places had some record lows, and you know, it can cause some severe damage on trees. And we've been getting a lot of questions about damaged trees and what's going on with them and will they survive. And we had Dr. Ellen Crocker create a video for us, and she's going to be talking about kind of the impact of that and kind of what we can expect. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up her video now.
So this has been a year for late frosts. After having, really warm conditions, we had a kind of sharp frost in April, followed by another one this past week. And we're seeing, a lot of impacts on some of our landscape trees, and it might look bad, but it's unlikely to kill or cause long-term damage to your trees, whether they're in the forest or the landscape setting. Now, what you will see is those newly emerging leaves, and especially buds or flowers, becoming kind of limp and wilted as soon as that freeze comes through, then browning and falling off. This also might result in some misshapen leaves. So you might not notice it until they expand a little bit more, but you might see some holes or some crumpling in those leaves. The species that are most impacted are going to depend on where you're living and what was leafing out in your area during this freeze, or maybe just getting ready to bloom. But I've seen a lot of damage on yellow poplar, redbud, yellowwood, pawpaw, coffee tree. In that first freeze that we had. Most recently, this one that we just had this week, I would expect to also be seeing some damage on hickory and maybe oak, as well as the other species that I mentioned. So the overstory tends to protect seedlings and saplings from this damage, and they're the most susceptible ones to frost damage. So you'd expect to see the worst damage in exposed settings, like landscapes, or seedlings regenerating in a recently cleared area or a reforested site. But you can even see some in the woods. So you might see a frost line, a distinct line of dead tree leaves, likely a particular tree species just leafing out when the cold hit. So the damage might look severe, but plants will usually recover and just send out another flush of leaves. If that terminal bud is killed, the one on the very tip, some of those axillary buds will grow, and soon you won't even be able to tell. But this is another stress to those species. And this isn't the only weather-related stress trees have had to deal with recently. Think back to last fall, how it was warm for a long time, and then all of a sudden we had a cold snap when trees weren't into dormancy yet. That can cause some damage. Before that, the drought that we had last summer, the extreme wet weather that we had before that. So all of these things can add together to really be a stress on trees. So I'd expect in the next few years that we'll see, more decline of trees. We'll see some of those opportunistic insects and diseases popping up that are associated with tree stress. Things like hypoxylin canker, ambrosia beetle, two-line chestnut borer. So something to keep an eye out for the next few years. And while in the forest and landscape setting, the damage from this frost to trees is likely to be temporary and minimal, in orchard settings, things have been much more severe. So not to downplay what's been happening there. So another kind of impact in forests that we might see from this is, the most susceptible tissue in a lot of these cases is buds and flowers. And if those are killed from the frost, we'd expect to see really low fruit set from things like pawpaw. I know that a lot of pawpaws were blooming right when that first freeze hit, and then those flowers died, so we won't expect to see much fruit this year. The same thing's true with other species. So years with late freezes like this are associated with low acorn production. So that could have implications for wildlife, as well as any plans, if you have plans to collect seeds or fruit this year. So I'm sitting here with one of my favorite landscape trees that I think is underused. This is yellowwood, and it's got a beautiful form, a kind of smaller tree, really nice flowers. But as you can see, this tree looks a little bit fried. We've got dead leaves here, but also the tree is responding by putting on new growth. And I don't anticipate long-term there's going to be a major negative impact to most of our native forest trees because of this. However, combined with the drought that we had last summer, as well as the cold snap that we had last November after it had been warm for a long time and trees hadn't entered dormancy, and then now another cold snap this spring, all of those things can really add up over time, especially with a tree like this, recently planted. Something you're going to want to think about, how can you promote the health of those trees as much as possible to prevent any long-term damage?
Well, we have Dr. Ellen Crocker on with us to talk about frost damage. And Ellen, there was a lot of different temperatures across the state when it came to frost damage.
There were, yeah. So this past week got really cold. So here's a map from Matt Dixon, who's with UK's Extension as well. And here you can see, it got really cold in some pockets, down to 20 degrees, 21 degrees in Pine Mountain, Black Mountain, I've heard from their agent there. Other little pockets across the state, 22, 23, 24. Now, I will say, I think it was a little bit warmer than was initially projected. So I know where we are here in Fayette County was projected to get down to 26, only got down to 29, but nonetheless, really unusual. This is, we are used to weird weather here in Kentucky. The saying, if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. But this is kind of far more than what we'd normally see. Nonetheless, I think most of our trees, our native trees, they're resilient. They're from here too, so they're kind of familiar with some of the things that might happen. I think they're going to make a full recovery, but you will be seeing leaves that are damaged, probably very low fruit set in some areas, depending on what was leafing out, what was flowering then.
I also want to remind people to type their questions in the chat pod if they have anything for Dr. Crocker. But yeah, I noticed yesterday I went out on my back porch for a little bit, and my tree in the backyard is kind of shriveling up a little bit. Some of them look fine, and other ones have like a shriveled brown kind of leaf. So
yeah, so we had a question about flowering trees that had buds that were not yet open when the frost hit. Will they bloom later or at all? So if you've got trees that were kind of had buds then that haven't turned brown or black, or have any of those frost damage symptoms, I think they're probably okay. In that early stage before they've fully expanded, some of those are more resistant to that damage. And some of our trees, will flower over a really broad range of time. So just because, let's say, pawpaw was really in bloom right when that first frost hit in April, doesn't mean that it won't continue to flower over a longer period of time. However, it's not, the tree will not be kind of producing new buds in response to that. Those buds were already produced, and so it's not going to have a kind of new flush of flowers to make up for what was lost this year. But many of our trees have kind of a longer window of flowering.
I was going to say, I was glad that you'd mentioned that there's a series of stressors that can really decimate trees, and often it's not just a single event, but it's kind of a combination of factors that kind of add up and can really cause some trouble for our trees.
So we had a question about ways to protect against frost damage. So I think, there's kind of two different things there. There's what you can do maybe for some seedlings in your landscape or some smaller plants versus, what can you do for a big tree? For a big tree, not much other than just in general promoting the health of those trees so that they can bounce back from this kind of thing. If there's frost damage, you can cover your plants, your shrubs, your trees all the way to the ground to try to prevent that. But some of the temperatures that we saw this past week, those were lower than what would have been benefited from that kind of covering. So that kind of goes beyond, above and beyond what we can really prepare for, at least with our trees in the landscape setting, and certainly with our forest trees. I also want to give a recognition of Dr. Bill Fountain, who's on the line with us today. And he's got lots of great information on kind of many of the impacts that these extreme temperature changes can cause to trees. If anyone has any questions, or Dr. Fountain, if you'd like to chime in with anything. Yeah, I tried my best. I covered all of my seedlings and my plants with, buckets and heavy cloth. I think with the temperatures that we had getting down kind of low enough, even with those efforts, not necessarily guaranteed success.
Yeah, I know I had tomato plants and I covered it with a big blanket and they still are brown right now. So that didn't help with the tomato plants. I'm kind of bummed about that, but I'll have to get me some more.
Fortunately, I think your trees will fare far better than your tomato plants.
Probably, I hope so. All right, looks like we can go on to our next topic, which is birding in the bluegrass.
Yes, we have Dr. Matt Springer created a nice video for us on birding in the bluegrass. So I'll go ahead and pull up Matt's video now.
Good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about birds and birding in the bluegrass, right? Our great state of Kentucky, as another, hobby that we can use to enjoy both either your backyard, your local forest, your farm, your forest, or even just your local park. And why do people bird? Well, paying attention to birds is a really simple thing we can do to enjoy the outdoors. And it's a way we can actually connect with scientists and biologists to really help out our environment and help birds out. So why do people care about birds? Well, first off, they're an extremely diverse class of animals. Just in Kentucky alone, we have about a little over 300 species that will be present within the state at some point during either year-round or at some aspect of their migration seasonally. They're great indicator species or group of species for ecosystem health. Remember Silent Spring and how that really, birds were the ones that kind of blew the whistle on DDT when we weren't seeing or hearing those birds out in the environment anymore. They can be consistently found in the habitat type that they would call home, their home ranges. So they're nice that you can almost kind of depend on finding them when you go looking for them. Especially, your common species, but also your uncommon species can pretty much be found if you look at one type, if you're going to one place that has that specific habitat type. If you go to 1, 2, or 3, you'll probably run into that species at one of them. They are really a beautiful group of animals. They're diverse plumages. They're very pretty. Sometimes they can look like they're changing colors as they are flying as the sunlight hits them. And on top of that, not only are they pretty to look at, but a lot of them have really interesting and very involved behaviors, whether it's either be mating behaviors or food caching behaviors. So they're very, very interesting on many accounts. And simply, they can really be attracted to feeders in your backyard. So you can see them on a regular basis. They're common. So it's an easy thing to get into. If you want to get into them, the tools of the trade are really simple. There's the need, and then there's the helpful. The need side is really, you can get yourself a cheap pair of binoculars and a field guide, or download a bird app on your phone. And the great thing is, the one from Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Merlin, is free and awesome. Helpful things, first and foremost, if you're just getting into it, find a friend or a mentor who can teach you the tricks of the trade. You can get a spotting scope for getting better images of those birds as they're up in the tops of the tree and further away. You can use a bird feeder, buy a bird feeder and start feeding birds. It'll help either, pick up new species during migration, but also help practice IDing birds while you're at home. You can get things like binocular chest straps, which help make things you're holding those binoculars more comfortable. Or you can get into trying to bird by ear, and you get the CDs, MP3s, and phone apps to help you learn those birds by song. Because this time of year is great because those birds are singing for their territories, let people know where they live. And you can actually more easily find birds by their song than by finding them by sight. I mentioned that link to biologists and scientists. Well, there's a lot of citizen science opportunities, and most of those go through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. They're the home for basically everything that is birding and citizen science. You have multiple projects that you can get involved in, from bluebird nesting studies to Project Feeder Watch to the Christmas bird count. There's a lot out there, and there's a lot of information on their websites to help you get involved and also teach you a lot about birds. If you want to get into, say, for example, Project Feeder Watch, you're going to look at types of feeders and getting into feeding birds. Well, the first thing here to keep in mind is that there's certain birds are attracted to certain types of feeder. Some are a little more generalist, but others are pretty particular. Think hummingbirds or orioles are attracted to the jams of the nectar or the sugar water, whereas other birds like goldfinches and sparrows, even things like blackbirds and doves, they're pretty broad in what they'll eat. So you have a bunch of different feeders out there. Just do a little research before you get into feeding birds. Make sure you're using the right type of feeder for the birds you may actually want to attract. And keep in mind, if you get into this, you're not just going to attract birds, even though they may dress up like birds. You will get into some other wildlife species that are going to also use that resource you're providing, like squirrels and raccoons, deer. So either you learn to live with feeding them as well, or you can try to put a little bit more money, and they have some guards to keep the squirrels and raccoons off those food sources. With that in mind, here's some more resources available to you. We have our state level Kentucky Ornithological Society, which has a wonderful network that you can get involved in, lots of information present. There's a field guide specifically for birds of Kentucky. There's also a book that came out of our department from my predecessor, Dr. Barnes, through the University of Kentucky Press. It talks all about gardening for birds, which is a wonderful thing you can do with your backyard. And here's the list of all the websites for the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and all the programs they have, like eBird, which is basically your listing online of everything you see on a regular basis that gives all their scientists access to where you're seeing things as well. And all that gets pulled, and then we can make a lot of really good insight and get a lot of good insight into what's going on, not only with birds, but also the environment that they're being an indicator to. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information, or you can find more information out at the Forestry Extension website at UK as well. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Matt, there was a couple of questions on here of, can you give the name of the bird app again?
Sure. The name of the bird app, the one that I personally use and that's also free, so that makes it handy, is called Merlin, MERLIN. And you can either search for it on your app store, or I believe you can also go to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and they have it listed on their website to find it and download it there. It's a wonderful app, and it has little packages inside of it that allows you to download your region that you're birding in. And then it has like search features for, I'm in a forest and I saw a yellow bird, and it'll actually populate a potential list of birds. It's a great resource.
Okay, great. One question I was wondering is, will the colder temperatures have effect on birds migrating into Kentucky?
So yeah, we're in the peak migration right now, and there, people have been noticing things like rose-breasted grosbeaks are all over the place. And cold weather can slow down migration. It can actually, in some cases, cause a reverse migration if it's extended, where birds will fly up, say, from Florida to Kentucky. And then all of a sudden we have a week of cold weather and they catch that front, they'll go back down to the Gulf Coast to where it's a little bit warmer and start all over again in about a week. But for a lot of our birds, a simple drop in temperature like we had this past week, for a night or two, they'll just hold tight and hunker down and puff up on wherever they are to stay warm, and then continue on.
I was going to say, Matt, I really appreciate the work you do here in Kentucky. You know, birds are a great way for us to kind of learn about the natural resources we have in our forests and the relationships. So, you know, it's a great entry point for a lot of people to kind of get interested in the outdoors. So I know that here in our family, we do a lot of birding as well. And it's always a lot of fun to kind of learn new birds and, you know, their behaviors, as you indicated, are very interesting. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it's birding is one that's sometimes overlooked by a lot of people, and then sometimes it's people's lives. The bird nerds, as we call them. But there's a lot of great state level chapters, local chapters. I mean, in Kentucky alone, we're the home of Audubon, so that's kind of a big deal if you're a bird person. So as you can see in the chat box, some folks are talking about it, and Hannah is mentioning the local chapter in Frankfurt. And there's a lot of resources out there, and honestly, if you want to get into it, usually you can find some folks that are very much into birding, and generally they're a very open group, and will be happy to have you tag along and teach you some of the tricks, because there is a lot out there that make this a lot easier, and if you're trying to get into it, especially when you're talking about trying to ID a bird that's 3 or 4 inches tall and going 30 or 40 miles an hour. So it's a great community to get involved in, and one that cares deeply about all of our natural resources.
And Matt, there was another question about what was the Birding by Ear app?
Sure. So the Birding by Ear app, there's actually several. The one that we mentioned, Merlin, has all the songs listed under the bird, so you can use that to try to learn by ear. Probably the best thing to do usually is to actually get the CDs or MP3s for birds, because it'll take you through all of them pretty quickly, and then allows you to practice on a regular basis, where some of those apps you have to actually go in and click on the individual species. There are probably apps out there that actually will help train you. I'm just not aware of any off the top of my head to point you to. Explore, Google search will give you options. I wouldn't go crazy on buying all kinds of apps, because there are several out there and they can get quite pricey. I would start with the free ones and see if you like it, and then go from there.
Okay. There was one more last question: is, does feeding birds cause dependency issues?
So there's also, I see it's also cause adverse issues or dependency issues. Mm-hmm. So hummingbirds are actually a great example of you could actually drastically increase your density of birds in one area if you have a lot of feeders out. And if you all of a sudden stop feeding for a period of even 2 or 3 days, you can cause a pretty big problem within that localized population. So in that case, yes, for hummingbirds especially, but for other birds, usually you won't have as much of a problem with feeding and causing a dependency. In terms of adverse issues, go back to the hummingbirds again, you want to make sure that your feeders are cleaned pretty regularly. When you think about hummingbirds and that sugar water, bacteria growth can happen very quickly. You want to actually clean those feeders pretty regularly, almost on a every day or every other day basis. And there's recommendations on only filling up certain amounts that are used in that time frame to help lessen the potential for bacterial growth and other issues. So yes and no. And one thing I will say, though, because we may have some folks down in bear country here, is that feeding birds usually in the summer is not a requirement to keep them and healthy and populations up. It will, though, attract, I picture the squirrel there, it'll attract bears too. So if you start having bears come around or raccoons come around, the best thing you can do is actually take those feeders down for a while, or put them in a place that they can't reach them.
Yeah, that was one clever squirrel that you showed there.
Oh yeah, they're theatrical.
Exactly. All right, I think that's all the questions for Dr. Springer. Dr. Springer, we appreciate you coming on, just like we do Dr. Laura DeWalt and everyone who helps us. It's a whole team effort to getting these shows on every week, so we appreciate it.
Yeah, without a doubt. And we've got one more segment coming up in today's show, and we're going to be talking about Kentucky's state tree, the yellow poplar. So another one of our team members, Laurie Thomas, an extension forester in our group, created a nice video for us, a presentation. I'll go ahead and share that.
Hi, I'm Laurie Thomas with the University of Kentucky Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, and I'm here with the tree of the week, the yellow poplar. It's a tall, fast-growing, beautiful deciduous tree of our eastern forest. It commonly grows more than 100 feet tall with a straight, limb-free trunk in a forested setting. Its common name is misleading because it's not in the poplar family, but actually in the magnolia family. It is thought the name poplar came from the way the leaves quivered in the wind, much like true poplars. Yellow poplar is also called tulip poplar or tulip tree, and it's Kentucky's state tree. The tree grows in the eastern half of the United States and is considered intolerant of shade. It is an effective pioneer species on disturbed sites within its range. It grows best in deep, moist, well-drained soils of forest coves. It's a relatively long-lived species that reaches maturity around 200 years of age. The showy tulip-like flowers have 6 petals that vary in color from light yellowish-green at the margins to deep orange in the center. The flowers are found typically at the end of the branches and somewhat high up in the canopy, so they can be difficult to see sometimes. They bloom after the leaves have emerged, somewhere from late April into June. The colorful center or base helps guide bees to the flower's abundant nectar. It is a source of gourmet honey. The nectar is also popular with the ruby-throated hummingbird. The leaves are deciduous and alternately arranged on the branch. They're somewhat shaped like a tulip. The twig has an interesting-looking terminal bud. It resembles a duck's bill. It's bivalved. The twigs have a slight, sweet, spicy scent when bruised or broken. The fall color tends to be a showy yellow to golden yellow, an attractive addition to any landscape. The fruit is an upright, cone-like aggregate of samaras, which are one-winged seeds. The fruit ripens between August and October, and the seeds are dispersed by the wind through late fall into the winter. Yellow poplar is a prolific seeder, and the seeds can stay viable in the soil for anywhere from 4 to 7 years. The bark is somewhat distinctive even though it varies as the tree ages. On young trees, the bark is light gray and somewhat smooth, with small white spots, but as the tree ages, it develops into long, rough, interlacing ridges separated by ashy gray fissures that appear diamond-shaped. Yellow poplar has long been an important timber tree. Early pioneers used the straight trunks to build cabins, and the wood was used for carriage bodies, shingles, saddle frames, and interior wood finishes. The sapwood tends to be light in color, and the heartwood tan to greenish brown to dark green. As you can see in the cut logs there, the heartwood is more towards the center. The wood is straight-grained and machines and glues well. It is used for interior finishes such as crown molding, trim, picture frames. It's also used for furniture, plywood, veneer, construction-grade lumber, and pallets. It's an overall extremely important timber tree. The national champion yellow poplar is in Chesapeake, Virginia. It's 390 inches in circumference, 100 feet tall, and has an 83-foot crown spread. Kentucky's champion yellow poplar is in McCreary County in the Daniel Boone National Forest. It's 220 inches in circumference, 163 feet tall, with a crown spread of 81 feet. If you'd like to know more about national champion trees, check out American Forest Champion Tree Registry or check out the Kentucky Division of Forestry Champion Trees. Now for just a few fun facts about our yellow poplar. It's the tallest hardwood in North America. It's called tulip tree for its tulip-like flowers. The scientific name Liriodendron is from the Greek lyrion and dendron, meaning lily tree, and tulipifera means tulip-bearing. It has also been called the canoe tree or canoe tree because Native Americans used the trunks to make dugout canoes. And it's also the state tree of Tennessee and Indiana. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about our state tree and get the opportunity to get out in your neighborhood, at a local park, or even your woodland and really enjoy our state tree, the yellow poplar.
Well, that was very interesting. I didn't know that you could do canoes out of the state tree.
It might take a lot of work, but yeah, certainly
Oh, I'm
amazing.
sure.
Did that a lot. You know, I love that tree. It is gorgeous. You see it a lot in the coves, as already mentioned, and it grows so straight and tall and so fast. That it's the state tree of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana gives you some kind of indication of just how widespread and abundant that species is. It actually has some of the highest volumes of all the wood we have here in Kentucky is in the yellow poplar. So very important tree to our wood industry for sure as well. So, well, Renee, it looks like we've done another show.
We have.
Yeah, so folks, we appreciate you all being with us. You know, we had some great segments. We really thank all of our presenters. And as Renee mentioned earlier, we do have these shows recorded on our fromthewoodstoday.com website. So we encourage you to check them out and visit them, and please share them with others. There might be some other folks that would be interested in this show as well.
Yes, and we're going to have an Extension folks only meeting after this. So if you're not part of Extension, a volunteer or an agent or what have you, then if you don't mind jumping off, we're going to have some question and answer time for them. But we greatly appreciate you joining us every week to come to these sessions. And next week, we're actually going to do a show on mushrooms. So that should be an interesting topic. Dr. Ellen Crocker will be doing that. We're also going to have our Tree of the Week again, and then garlic mustard. So if you have any of that in your forest, you want to stick around next week and watch that.
Yep. All right, folks, thank you again for being with us. Please share the word with others that might be interested in this. And as always, we appreciate you all being with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you all next week on From the Woods Today.